Welcome everyone to Come Follow Me with Lolo and Perry. How are you doing today, Lolo?
I'm doing great. Just nailing it. Doing awesome
Just
today. If we were able to edit it, as Perry hit record, I yell to my loving husband in the kitchen, "Hey, can I get some more tea?" So that was
it's just fantastic timing on my part, and we were going for that. So hopefully you all enjoyed the little bit of comedy and breaking up there as we kind of got into the start of this episode. The good news is that we have a pretty concise episode this week after what has undoubtedly been a bit of a marathon this last week. We are recording this before the Nahum and Deutero Isaiah episodes, and I can only imagine how out of hand those have likely been. Hopefully, they were fantastic and wonderful, and the best thing that happened to Mormon podcasting this month.
obviously.
We are the best. So let's go ahead and get started into our deck. We're talking about Second Nephi, chapters 1-2. We are out of First Nephi. How exciting is that?
Woo!
Yes, very. That was a true display of excitement and enthusiasm, because we are moving on to usually the book that I think that people get stuck in and never get past. Mostly the Isaiah chapters, but we are going to make those very fun and exciting when we get there. Today we are talking about the very first theodicy of the Book of Mormon. And we'll talk about what that even means, because I imagine not everybody who is tuning in here is familiar with that term. So
I was
theodicy,
I was not until this.
We are here to learn. We are here to learn you some stuff, Lolo.
I'm so excited.
So a theodicy is an answer to the problem of evil. That's pretty much what a theodicy in summary is, which goes to then the question of, okay, what's the problem of evil? And the problem of evil is an argument against certain God claims, usually associated with classical theism, the idea of a tri-omni God that's all powerful, all loving, all knowing, all good is another omni trait that gets tacked onto that God as well. And essentially, like the existence of evil, if you have a God that has just maximal power and maximal love and maximal knowledge, evil just shouldn't exist in that situation, because whatever designs that God has should be sufficient to create the desire to prevent evil, the power necessary to stop it, and the wisdom or the knowledge necessary to design existence and its plan without the existence of evil. But we do see that evil exists as one of those just normal observations that people have, that, hey, bad stuff happens. And so why does this bad stuff happen if God has these attributes?
My favorite answer to that was seminary. I highly doubt that my early year seminary teacher, I don't think she'll be watching. She might, and if she does, rock on. She was an excellent seminary teacher. And if not, that's fine. But her answer to this was, God is just helping you be grateful for the good times. And I'm like, I really feel like I could be grateful enough on my own without this. Can I just try, please?
Right. I think that she would have gotten that answer, that theodicy, from the section that we're covering today. It's a small part of that overall picture, but I imagine that is where she drew that from, because the theodicy we're covering, this first theodicy of the Book of Mormon, is probably its best. We'll talk about that going into the next slides, but first we have a little bit of mythical history to cover. And this is the story of Adam and Eve that shows up all over the place in First Nephi 1 and 2. So Adam and Eve is an etiological myth. That means that it describes it's a myth about where stuff comes from. and it describes where the first humans come from. It describes, like essentially the origin of suffering, the pain of childbirth that's imposed on Eve is an ideological myth for, why childbirth hurts so much. It's an ideological myth for knowledge about good and evil, and for also why people hate snakes is also part of that myth. How animals got their names is part of it.
So
there's a lot of different things this origin for.
Here's my confusion, and I don't, and this is my thought. So the whole thing that drew my family to, not the whole thing, but a big part of it was the not having the sins of the father, that you're only responsible for your own mistakes, not everybody else's, except with childbirth. We're still paying for Eve's mistake.
Well, it says you're not responsible for the sins of the father, not the sins of the mother.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Dang it, Adam.
No, go on. Sorry, because you're right. Like, no! This is one.
Your answer was too perfect, and my brain is now buffering. But it just was always super confusing to me. And then when I asked my seminary teacher, she said, it's so that you can fully appreciate the new life you've brought into this world. If it was easy, would you really appreciate it? Yes. Yes, I would. As somebody who has been through childbirth, yes, I can. Yes, I would appreciate it.
It's funny that would have to be applied to women to appreciate the life that they brought into the world, but men don't go through that. So what's to cause them?
Well, men are superior. We've got those tiny
that's
girl
right.
brains.
We have the priesthood, and therefore, yeah. Boy, I'm excited for the episode we've got planned, the special episode we've got planned here in a couple of months. That's going to be great.
And let me apologize to everybody for the. We are getting over the funk. It's not COVID. It's just junk.
It's not only is winter coming, winter is here, and apparently it's trying to knock down your door from what I'm hearing. So
yes, it is. I think 11 degrees in Texas. We are not prepared for this. We don't.
Okay, so I live in Japan. So when you say 11 degrees, you mean Fahrenheit, right?
Fahrenheit, correct. Fahrenheit.
Okay, all right. You got to help me out because I've been living in Celsius for the last 5 years or so, and
and obviously because metric is not good enough, so we do Fahrenheit.
Yeah,
and
I know you're using the freedom units over there, so it's
that's correct.
A little bit of an adjustment every time I talk to one of them dang Americans.
And I don't even know I don't know what 11 degrees is in Celsius. What is it? 79,000? Is that the correct?
Something along those lines. That's right.
That's what I thought. Seems accurate.
I
remember.
Yeah, spot on. Your conversion chapter is just fantastic.
Make my high school my high school science teacher proud.
Making the seminary teacher proud, the high school science teacher, math teachers proud. It's great.
I'm doing awesome.
Well, what didn't make people proud was the story of Adam and Eve before the exile.
That was.
I tried to segue there. So yeah, basically before the exile, we really don't have record of this story showing up anywhere. Most likely, the version of the myth as we have it today just didn't exist. There's enough influence from other surrounding cultures and similarities that we see from other Near Eastern cultures that would suggest influence into that account. It's also notable
that we know first come on the scene.
It's not 100% clear per se. I've seen it all goes back to like after the exile. So at some point in time around the late 6th, early 5th century BCE is what I have come across. But I'm not 100% certain on the date on that one. it's a little bit tough to find good data on this because
Mhm.
it gets buried under so much apologetic BS that parsing out the actual scholarship, if you don't have like very good access to all the scholarly materials, can be really pretty painful
Yeah.
to try and dig
So
up.
fun.
Yeah, so a little bit of a side tangent on that. When I was getting ready for my mission, I had this, wonder, like, how on earth could somebody be an atheist? Like, how do you ever get to that point of not being able to look around you and just see like the grand majesty of like divinity and of God? And then I read apologetics for this story, for the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and I was like, oh, that's how. Got it. Makes
There it
sense
is.
now. Like, the apologetics for it was just so bad. Yeah, that was the story. Like I said, it's central to so much of Christian theology, and so it winds up getting protected, even though the story has nothing to do with the later developments. Like, the authors of this story had no idea about the later theologies that would come up in Christianity. And Christianity's like responses to the story are just that. They're a response to an existing narrative, not this narrative did not predict the other.
No.
But that's not how a faithful narrative would take it. There's only, I think, one Old Testament writer who refers to the Adam and Eve story. It is post-exilic, and that is one of the things that can kind of help us to date when the story came onto the scene. But yeah, it's really not referenced. The fact that it doesn't get referenced at all before the exile is pretty telling, and it's one of those things that tells me this text, this story, would not have been on the brass plates that Lehi took out of Jerusalem, or that Nephi took out of Jerusalem forcefully.
Totally with
So
Laban's consent. It's fine.
Laban's, yes, ghostly consent. Within the story of Adam and Eve, though, as you'll remember, there's a serpent, right? There's the serpent that is the most subtle beast of all of the beasts, right? This is the very cleverest serpent, and you have God having commanded Adam and Eve that they can eat the fruit of any tree that they want in the garden, except for the one super special tree that if they eat of it, then they will, in the day that they eat of it, they shall surely die.
Which 100% happened. Honesty throughout the whole thing.
Right. Because what we also find out is that the serpent, that is just a snake. It's just a serpent, right? Like, and this is not anything else. The imposition that the serpent was Satan or the devil is a later imposition by Christians trying to bring this all together. And this is an innovation that comes up later on. It is not something that a First Temple Jew, such as Lehi, if he had even had access to the story, would have understood the story to be. It's just a snake. It's a talking snake, which is pretty cool, though. And this talking snake says to the woman, "Hey, like, if you eat the tree, the fruit of the tree, like, you're not going to die. Like, you'll be as the gods, knowing good and evil." And later on, when God is talking about this whole situation, God says, they have become as one of us, knowing good and evil. And also, they don't die that day. They, in fact, live, according to the rest of the myth, a very long time afterwards, nearly a millennium.
Well, and I will tell you what's interesting with, and this is kind of a tangent a little bit, with this snake symbolism and showing up in the story from a more pagan point of view, snakes symbolize intelligence, cunning, like they're not bad or evil. They are the bringers of higher intelligence. So
what we're seeing is a pretty consistent parallel between the Adam and Eve myth and these other pagan ideas about serpents.
Correct.
Which happens. People come up with similar ideas when they're with similar situations, and yeah, serpents, I guess, look pretty crafty and intelligent if you're
I think it's interesting because we see later on Christians pull so much from paganism. Why not this story as well? Or at least
Right.
the symbolism in it, because they're trying to make Christianity more palatable to the people that were there before, who had the more naturalistic religions. So why not use symbolism they're already going to be familiar with?
And that's one of the things that we've talked about a little bit in previous episodes, right? Is that when we talk about Christology, we talked about how Greco-Roman influence was so key in developing like even low Christology, and let alone the higher levels of it. Or when we talked about the doctrine of hell, when that came up in our Revelation episode, that like without Greco-Roman influence, you really don't have this idea of hell as it appears in Christian ideas. So yeah, it's of course they're pulling from these different sources. And we see that the Noahic flood is also within a certain context of within its Near Eastern context. And yeah, no, absolutely. What this is not a story of the devil tempting the woman Eve to eat of the fruit and defy God. That is not what the story is. But it is
No,
kind of
this
what
is,
Lehi tries to make it be.
to me, it was always very confusing as somebody who came from a Southern Bible Belt Christian background. It was always super confusing why the snake was bad. He was just trying to help increase knowledge. Teachers are not paid well, but they are revered for passing on that knowledge. But it's bad if the snake does it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dang it! What's the name? What's the name of the Greek character who gives fire to humanity?
Oh God! If you hadn't asked me, I could have
I'm
told you.
completely
Wait,
blanking on the name right now,
nope.
but
I'm looking it up. Who gave?
but it's the same concept, right? It's
Yes,
you have this person who's giving people knowledge, and the act
Prometheus.
Prometheus. Thank you, Prometheus. Jeez, there's a movie with the man's name.
Yeah.
Prometheus. Like you have the story of Prometheus, and Prometheus gives knowledge to humanity, and it's Prometheus that's punished for that. Instead of it being like humanity that ends up being punished, but it's still like a similar concept. The awarding of knowledge, the gaining of knowledge comes with a certain consequence. And we see this throughout myths. It's common today to have like a myth about like accessing certain knowledge coming with consequences, like the unforeseen consequences, or even like there's this price that must be paid in order to obtain this special secret knowledge. It happens throughout. It's in comic book mythology. It's in all sorts of storytelling.
Let's keep them dumb, because if they're dumb people don't question. Dumb people don't. And it's always curiosity killed the cat. But the whole saying is, yet satisfaction brought him back. So
Yep.
if you're going to use that as your argument, at least research it.
Right. And so, I mean, there's always the question of how much you talk about like what goes on in the temple. And my general rule of thumb is that if you're not under covenant, to not specifically discuss it outside of the temple, that it is okay to talk about that. So science tokens, names, all of that, they're off limits. You're under covenant to not discuss those outside of the temple. Great, we're fine. We'll keep those. We'll protect those for just out of respect for the broader community. But Lucifer, Satan, the serpent in the endowment narrative of the Garden of Eden, and what he says, we're not under covenant on that at all. And so when he says that he is doing that which has been done on other worlds, this was one of those things that just drove me nuts as well, because now we're talking about he is deliberately trying to fulfill God's plan. He knows what the plan is, and now he's trying to do it. And now we're introducing this whole other wrinkle into the story, and it was already confusing enough. And when we're trying to squeeze it into this context and we're adding this, that's why when it's just it's so much clearer what the intent of the story is when you understand it was a serpent and this is an ideological myth describing a bunch of just different things. It's not meant to be an actual like history of the very first people. It served a particular theological purpose at the time.
I missed a lot of Satan narrative in the movie, in the endowment, because his jacket was just on point. And I just, he's so fashionable.
Yeah, and I'm like, he is. Definitely steals the show every time he's on screen.
Every time. And I'm like, this is the guy we don't want to be like. Come on.
I know. Yeah. There are some other things to kind of talk about offline with that, but because we could end up going down a rabbit hole.
So many rabbit holes.
It's it's an additional wrinkle whenever there are these attempts to try and reconcile this story with modern Christian ideas, you end up with these kinds of problems. And Mormonism, broadly speaking, is not any exception to that. And the Book of Mormon itself here presents its own issues. In particular, as we've talked about with other topics that have come up in this dialogue, that Lehi's ideas that he is supposed to be presenting as a First Temple Jew reflect a 19th century Protestant worldview on the story, not that of a First Temple Jew. You are muted, my friend.
I was going to say, how about that? Super interesting.
Right. I mean, this has come up with the Christology that we've discussed. It has come up with the Book of Revelation as we discussed that, and we're seeing it again here with the story of Adam and Eve. So, and Deutero-Isaiah is another huge chunk on that. So we haven't recorded that episode yet, but y'all have hopefully seen that. So you've seen how Deutero-Isaiah is just a huge issue for the Book of Mormon, and how it would not have been something that Lehi possessed. Though we can at least go back to the 5th or 4th centuries BCE to get to that. I just want to make clear, because the Lehi goes through and literally associates the serpent of the Garden of Eden with the devil. It's worth noting that this is a problem.
Yeah, agreed. I'm sorry, I don't have anything to really add to that. You nailed it.
No worries. So let's talk about the theodicy that's here, though. So there are all these historical issues that are associated with the text. Let's set those aside for right now and actually talk about this idea of Adam fell that men might be, and men are that they might have joy, right? This is one of those scripture masteries. This is one of those verses that we kind of just get lodged into our brains because it's brought up so many times. And then in verse 27, it's the scripture that talks about how men are free according to the flesh to choose good or evil.
I'm sorry.
And captivity. And
being
it is. This is the content that the people pay for.
I was like, can you be codependent in like an hour? Just give me an hour.
Every time that I try to do my language lessons and stuff, I do that over a video chat, and that's when my dog decides he wants to be part of the conversation as well. So
look at the precious.
Totally. I know, just adorable. Oh,
her name is Fizzgig, and we love her.
Fizzgig, is that a drow name?
It is. So the 80s were a magical time in cinema, and Jem Henson was just a trailblazer. And for those who have seen The Dark Crystal, the little hairy ADHD ball that kind of jumps around, it fits.
I'm weirdly not that far off from asking if that was a drow reference.
I was going to say you were really close.
I'm just off enough that I'm not correct, but for a guess, that was not bad.
That was impressive. I'm super impressed.
I would say. Okay, so in the story, as Lehi is using the story of Adam and Eve to provide context for why there is suffering in the world, and that this is the result of Adam's deliberate decision to partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that brings into it this circumstance in which now humans have to exercise agency. And in that act of exercising agency, suffering, evil gets introduced into the equation. And that is so, in part, we can understand what is good and what is bad, and we can make those decisions accordingly. It's a catalyst that facilitates agency. And this is a pretty interesting idea, that the reason why evil exists is because God had to have a world for humans to be tested, for them to choose good or evil for themselves, and that the only way to do that was to allow there to be evil to exist. And that is a decent theodicy all around. It's actually, I would say, even though this is the first theodicy that shows up in the Book of Mormon, this is the most compelling of its theodicies. And it is one that I still hear from Christian apologists today, usually in different words, dressed up in different forms, but it does show up. And we were talking a little bit about this, that we had discussed previously in our episode about Christology, about the Mosaic priority, because we were talking about the lost 116 pages, and we wanted to talk about how that could affect the sequence of writing the text there. Yeah. One of those things, one of those little things to me that supports this Mosaic priority is the fact that while this is the first theodicy that gets written down in the sequence as we read it, it's the last theodicy, or one of the last theodicies, that Joseph Smith will write or will have written into the Book of Mormon as we have it today. So if he's developing this in a certain sequence, and his first theodicies that he's putting in there are not great, and when we get to those chapters, we'll talk about why those theodicies are pretty bad. By the time we loop around to this one, we've got one
solid logic.
Compelling. Yeah, to me, it follows that this would be a later development, that this is him just getting better and better at answering this particular question, and the last time that he does it is the best time.
Well, and I'll tell you, coming from a non-Mormon, because so my kind of route to Mormonism, for the first 14 years of my life, I was staunchly Southern Baptist. And so looking at the history of where Joseph Smith would be coming from in his time frame, with the big revivals coming, even the mainstream Protestants didn't have a solid answer. Because I asked this very question to the preacher, and you get those, why question God? What's wrong with you? He's going to hear you. It's like, don't say Voldemort's name. We don't question God where he can, are you wanting him to strike us down? So let's make it terrifying to ask questions, and that way we don't have to think of a good answer.
Right. And this is one of those questions so difficult to answer that, you get the God's ways are higher than our ways, or the Lord works in mysterious ways, but just a bunch of different variations of this idea of don't ask, because there isn't an answer that's really going to satisfy your faith, and who are you to question God anyway?
To question God. God works in mysterious ways, guys. It's totally fine.
Yeah. So we're not willing to accept that on our podcast. We've got to talk a little bit about some of the shortcomings that are going to actually show up with what is otherwise a good theodicy. And this is, there is at least a compelling reason. But this one hinges on the principle of agency, right? You have to have agency. In order for there to be agency, in order for you to catalyze agency, you have to have both good and evil. Otherwise, you can't choose between good and evil, because if there's only good, you can't choose evil, and so that limits your agency. Or if there's only evil, you can't choose good because there's only evil. So there has to be
and that was Satan's plan, and that's why Satan.
And that was Satan's plan. Dang it. He got
put in timeout for that one.
Right. He got the eternal time in the standing in the corner. But this does beg the question, helpful. Okay, so in heaven, does that mean that there's evil in heaven? Is there suffering in heaven? If there's not, is there agency in heaven? Do we still have it? Are we still like able to choose there? If agency isn't a necessary part of being in heaven, why do we need it here?
And I
So
want to
that's like,
tell you, I'm sorry, I keep talking over you. I'm so sorry.
no.
This is an interesting take because I was speaking with somebody, and I'm not going to say her name because I did not get permission beforehand, but we were discussing, and this is back when I was very, very Mormon. And we were talking about her at this point. She was kind of falling away from the faith. And yes, Fizzy is just super helpful. And I asked her, I said, don't you want to go to the celestial kingdom? Like, why wouldn't you want that? And she looked at me and said, oh God, why would I want that? She's like, having to go somewhere where everybody's perfect and there's no bad ever. She said, think about the kind of pressure that's going to put on me. I would hate that. That would be my hell. And I thought, well, good God Almighty, that just flipped my worldview.
There is nothing quite like finding somebody who will actually deconstruct what heaven would be like for kind of putting you on the,
Yes.
oh, I need to think about this more. That was what got
Yes.
me as well. That was like one of my, I know there's a few different little catalysts that I have to my faith deconstruction. And one of them was a gay person saying in a comment, like basically like, why would a gay person want to go to the celestial kingdom and be changed and then be given a spouse of the opposite sex? Why does that make any sense? And that just completely rocked my whole perspective on that issue. I wish I could
Never
give the
thought about
attribution
that.
to the person who made that comment because it completely changed my approach to that. And I have no idea who it was anymore. I don't know where I saw that. Like, I know I was at BYU Idaho when I came across that. Just completely rocked my perspective. But it's the same thing, right? It's this confronting these types of questions. Okay, but like, let's actually break this down. And like, this is why, like, when we have like a theodicy like this one in the Book of Mormon, you get this answer to a problem of evil, and then you try to interrogate it just a little bit further,
Yeah.
and you just run into the wall of don't ask. Like, this is what we've gotten. Just be grateful for what you have as an answer. And
Yes.
yeah, I'm really not into that. And maybe that's my grand fault, but if you believe in a triomni God, he made me that way. So again, whose fault is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. All right. So, I mean, like, that it gets into this too of like, is there no other way for the deity to achieve this end? We talked at the beginning about this, that a theodicy in general relies on this assumption that this is the way it had to happen. If there wasn't any other way.
Yeah.
And, if there's one person, going back to the endowment, if there's one person who says there is no other way, it's Lucifer. So either he's right and there was no other way, or there was, and there could have been another design, and
Yeah.
that just wasn't selected for some reason. And then I think the big issue that theodicies like this fail to address because they're so focused on moral agency, what role does natural evil play? And the example of this is like Stephen Fry's "What about bone cancer in children?" What role does that possibly play in this design? How does bone cancer in children improve my ability to choose between good and evil? Like, how?
Again, I don't get that.
Yeah.
As somebody
Yeah.
who, so my son is disabled, and everybody's like, oh, and maybe this is just me being bitchy. I don't know. So when my son accomplishes things that normal children accomplished years earlier, they're like, oh, well, praise God. Look what good things God has done. And I'm like, okay, by your logic, though, didn't God make him disabled?
Right.
So, I mean, and my belief is, I don't care who made him. I love him exactly like he is, and I wouldn't want him to be normal anyway, because autism is not a disability, That's a different ability. But I don't know. It
Hey,
just it kind of balks in the face of God is doing wonderful things. I saw online somebody said, "Can you imagine my aunt's house burned down and the only thing that was spared was a Bible. Praise Jesus." And I was like, "Well, couldn't Jesus save her house? Come on."
right. That, and by the way, the reason why that Bible survives is because the nature of the pages is such that it doesn't burn very well.
Yeah. No, it
So
was
yeah, that's
Jesus. Didn't you hear?
yeah, no. And like that does get to the point though of like if in order to deal with this, in order to deal with these challenges of just like the realities of like, especially of natural suffering, you have to, if you're going to have a tri-omni, like classical theist conception of God, you wind up doing these weird gymnastics to jump through these challenges, and you just end up presenting other issues altogether. And it also results, I think, in just to your point, like unintended offensiveness, like people just saying things that are
Yeah.
wildly offensive while intending to just be really, really nice about it. And yeah, it's like
So
I
my
understand where you're
response is
coming from, but
always, yes, that's true. Yay for the all of it. Yes, I am so glad that this affirmed your faith. What?
bless your heart.
Yes, that is when the bless your heart hits.
I know I spent enough time in the South to know what that phrase actually means.
It means bless your heart.
Yeah. It has the same meaning as with all due respect in the military. I've learned that as well. Those are roughly synonymous phrases in as much as they can be translated from one language to the other.
If you're ever in the South, northern folks, and in Texas, and a sweet Southern woman says, "Oh, well, just bless your heart," she's not complimenting you, and that's not a nice thing.
There's
You're an
nothing.
idiot, and
Yep.
she's telling it to you in
Yep.
the most direct way possible.
According to Southern social norms and mores.
Obviously.
Obviously. Yeah. So
Sorry, way
we
off
talked
topic
here. No,
there.
no, this is what we do. That's part of the charm of our conversations here.
I love
We
how
talked about
you come in with just expert level knowledge, and I'm just sitting here like four raccoons in a trench coat who just lives in constant chaos, who is just absorbing your wisdom. So I like our
given how
dynamic.
clever raccoons are, it's much more likely that I'm the four raccoons in the trench coat. So, um, so yeah, so we've talked here now about the theodicy in the Book of Mormon, or this first theodicy of the Book of Mormon, and that the fact that it is compelling. It does answer one of the greatest challenges of philosophy to classical theism. It is also rife with its own set of shortcomings, and I think that it's worth mentioning those shortcomings. But it is also remarkable to note that Joseph Smith, as an upstate New York farm boy writing in the early 19th century, just chilling and hanging out at these Second Great Awakening revivals and coming down to sit down and dictate this text, does manage to produce one of the more compelling theodicies out there. And it's possible he came up with this on his own. It's possible that this is a result of going through multiple iterations and just that process of his mind developing and coming up with different solutions to this. It's also possible that he got the idea from some preacher who was just going off on this topic and he just kind of borrowed that sermon for this section. There are possible sources for it, but I do find it remarkable nonetheless, whatever the source ultimately was, that Joseph Smith was able to produce this particular text that has a rather compelling theodicy in it. All issues set aside, I think that is worth noting and worth commenting on, that it is, I have circled that drain.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because for me personally, I just never found a story that was satisfying. And while this one isn't satisfying, it's as satisfying as you're going to find in the text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey,
It's something where
show,
if you're really trying, you can accept it. Just don't look at the man
yeah.
behind the curtain.
Show me a Christian apologist who has come up with a better theodicy than this one.
Yeah.
I'll wait. Like, I mean, and that is not from lack of listening to Christian apologists. It's kind of from the opposite side of that, where I've just listened to so
Yeah.
much of it that eventually it's like, oh my gosh, this thing that I learned in seminary and primary, really, as this answer to
Yeah.
the problem of evil, is as good as the best of what you're producing. Now they do couch it, I think, in more sophisticated language and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
but it all comes down to the
But
same idea.
I was going to say the roots, the bones of it, it's not going to get any better.
No, and it's just such a challenge to classical theism that um, I don't know how else you would resolve this issue
Mm-hmm.
uh, without all these added assumptions going into it that sort of defy a rational approach to the question. You kind of have to go in with prior assumptions in mind and set aside the inquisitive, skeptical, rational approach to the questions, and then be willing to accept what this answer is. And I would say, even if you're looking at it rationally, skeptically, all of that, this is still compelling. It's still interesting.
Yeah.
It's just those shortcomings are they're not so insignificant that it goes to the point of saying, "Oh, okay, no, the problem of evil is solved now." Like,
Right.
you still got some work to do.
Yeah. Do we talk about Lilith now, or I dropped my Sudafed? There it is.
We kind of jumped right past that, but we can talk a little bit about that. So, back here, so we had mentioned that the story as we have it today did not exist before the exile, but we also note that in the Genesis account, there are two creation stories that God creates man and woman, and then he does it again in Genesis 2. So in Genesis 1, he does it, and he does it again in Genesis 2.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these Jewish scholars who are looking back at this. They're trying to understand why are there these two creation stories, and they come up with the story of Lilith. And this popped up on Facebook recently, actually, and I responded to a comment in there. There was somebody who commented, they gave like basically the spot on correct answer. I'm like, oh yeah, nailed it, perfect. And then I was like, hey, good job, like that's fantastic.
So
You
I
beat me
I
to
and
it.
this is just me being ignorant. So my own journey is a little bit interesting. So as I'm not saying that I'm not LDS. I don't know what I am. But as I have opened my options spiritually, and I've been looking into more witchcraft and paganism and those sort of things, from my understanding, and please correct me if I am incorrect, Lilith was sort of a Christian morphing of prior pagan gods and goddesses. And they had to sort of add her in to show how, oh, look, paganism is so bad. Look at her wanting to, reverse cowgirl. How could she? And so that was sort of their way of saying, see, come here, let us teach you the right way, not the naughty pagan goddess way. So,
I think it was just cowgirl, not reverse cowgirl, but
oh, silly me. It's
she
been
just
so
wanted to be
long
on
since
top.
I've
I think
read
it's
Genesis. It's been so long.
and it's not right. So the story of Lilith is not actually in Genesis. It is this later creation, and it's the result of, to my understanding, Jewish scholars producing that story, and then it gets co-opted in the Christian tradition as Lilith becoming this more demon figure that would eat the children and needed to be warded off, and so you had to have these talismans that would protect against Lilith. And that has then its association with like sort of anti-paganism and
Mm-hmm.
associating like any sort of pagan deity with these other demonic entities that we already know from the Bible. And so we're going to put them together. And now we need to find ways of, and so this is folklore. Ultimately, this is folklore. When we get to Lilith, it's not textual to the Bible, though there is, I believe, a reference to a Lilith in the Old Testament, but it's outside of the context of this story. And anyway, so you have this folklore that's developing around these ideas, around these figures. But saying that Lilith develops out of sort of an anti-Paganist tradition is a bit of an overreach. But some of the steps that are taken against Lilith do have their roots in responding to paganism.
Okay, that's interesting. I'd always kind of wondered. Yeah, I'd always kind of wondered how, because I had, from my understanding, they are incorporating things like the Christian church is coming in and they're trying to convert these people. So they're like, oh, okay, well, they already do the winter solstice. Jesus' birthday. We'll just combine that. That's fine. And Easter or Oaster was the pagan, celebration of spring. Jesus died, eggs, rabbit. Fine, we'll just put that together. So I wasn't sure if
this is where I recommend Dan McClellan's channel like crazy, because there's responses to every single one of these issues.
Wait, who?
On his channel. Yeah, I know. It doesn't. I managed to go 90-something% of this episode without specifically naming.
Super impressed.
I think you should be very.
Dan McClellan, we love you.
We stand Dan.
We do.
This is where I plug that, because he gets into details and a lot of the scholarship about Lilith, about Easter, about Christmas, about where these come up. I would also recommend Religion for Breakfast. He just recently did a video about the origins of the Christmas tree and where that likely actually came from, which I found very fascinating. So if you've got questions on those topics. Yeah.
This is my Yule tree. Her name is Mabel.
Are you supposed to name a Yule tree? I wasn't aware of that.
No, she looked like a Mabel.
She just looked like a Mabel. That's fair enough.
Yeah. Well,
the Mabel that I know is from Gravity Falls.
I was gonna say, for the the true geekies, Mabel Pines and Mabel Pine. So.
Got it. That makes sense.
I was trying to save some.
You have converged these things together.
Yeah.
Nope. That was true brilliance, and a marvelous work and a wonder. Thank you, LoLo. Okay. But yeah, so I will plug Dan for those conversations on those topics. Just he covers them in great detail. Religion for Breakfast is another great source for that. I don't think I've seen as much from Bart Ehrman on those subjects. So those are kind of the scholarly sources I would recommend just touching base with on those ideas. And then they have further sources that if you're interested in looking into that you can go to for books and articles and the like.
Right now I'm doing Naked Mormonism with, I'm going to butcher that. So
yeah,
what's
Bryce?
How do you say it?
Bryce Blakeney.
That one.
No,
that guy.
I have a bad habit of like intentionally misspelling and mispronouncing Bryce Blakenagle's last name, and I think that he does it as well. So
you're meaning like almost like a Benadryl cucumber patch
like
instead of Benedict.
Right along those lines. Right along those lines. No, I think Bryce is great, and I think that he does a lot of really good work. I also disagree with him on certain conclusions, and would, we could do conversations on that. He is much more in the camp of there was a source manuscript that is informing the Book of Mormon, and I am very much opposed to that particular camp.
Yeah.
So we have disagreements, but I think that they're, a little bit more informed than sometimes you get with just like the pure like apologetic narrative of anyway,
historical work.
Maybe I shouldn't maybe I shouldn't disparage that too much because I'm not a scholar, neither is Bryce, and we're both just kind of playing in deep waters and hoping we don't drown. So, um,
I've got my water wings. We're doing fine.
we're doing great. All right, so next week we're gonna dive into 2 Nephi 3 through 5. We'll talk about how Joseph Smith and all these other dudes show up in the Book of Mormon and how that ends up being kind of interesting and weird. Lehi dies, and Nephi gets bummed out about that and starts talking about all of his sins and stuff. No mention of Laban, weird enough. And then we'll talk about the Nephites and the Lamanites going their separate ways and how things get. Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't talk about 2 Nephi 5 without talking about racism. So guess what? We're going to have loads and loads of fun. And, people of our particular tone talking about racism is always a recipe for not getting canceled on Twitter. So I'm sure it's going to be safe and great.
We got this.
So
totally
we got
fine.
this. We got this. All right, LoLo, thank you so much for joining.
The two whitest white people talking about racism written by the other whitest white person ever.
Now we can have a conversation where we'll justify that particular perspective of why it needs to be white people talking about racism. We'll talk about that a little bit as well because we need to take some ownership about talking about that issue because I don't think that it's responsible to go past 2 Nephi 5 without talking about it. It's racist rhetoric and how that impacted Mormonism broadly and especially the Brighamite tradition for a long time and continues to impact parts of the Brighamite tradition to this day.
And I'm just going to say from my own personal opinion, it keeps talking about how beautiful and lovely the white people are. If Nephi saw our day, did he miss Idris Elba? Because that's beautiful.
Seriously, man. Dude. Idris Elba. I mean,
have you seen the new Doctor?
I'm like,
come on.
I know. Shuri Gatwa. I believe I have pronounced that name correctly. Shuri Gatwa is he's fantastic. He was great in Sex Education, and I'm really enjoying him so far as the Doctor. Hopefully the writing is good for his Doctor because his performance has been quite excellent. So hopefully the writing and all that's up to the task.
I'm excited.
But we'll see. I'm looking forward to it as well. We'll see the spring, huh?
Off the subject of the Book of Mormon. Sorry, Idris Elba, and I'm not even going to try because I don't want to butcher his name, and he's just beautiful. Anyway, moving on. It's fine.
Yeah. So we'll get into all the fun stuff next week, and we'll cover all of that with you, lovely people. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, LoLo, for being here, and
thank you, Perry.
Hey, woo! And we will see you all next time on Come Follow Me with LoLo and Perry.